so it is getting closer to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will be starting now. I'd first of all like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. My name is Zachary Berglund. I am a graduate student of food science at Purdue University, and I have the pleasure of hosting these webinars with these amazing speakers. Before we begin, I ask that each of you fill out the survey in the chat that I have filled. If you've already filled it out, feel free to double check that you did. You should be getting a confirmation email to the email that you used in the survey if you were prompted for one. Additionally, this email will be recorded and sent to those who signed up for the webinar when the recording is finished and is available. Should you have any questions during points at the webinar, feel free to post them in the chat or send them directly to me via chat direct message. After the end of this 30-minute presentation, there will be 15 minutes for questions and answers where we will be going over these questions and more that come up at then. Without further ado, I'd like to start off by introducing today's speaker, Dr. Betty Feng. Dr. Betty Feng is an assistant professor of food science at Purdue University with several years of experience in outreach and education. Dr. Feng's research and extension program explores various factors that affect food safety behaviors. The goal of her research program is to identify barriers to understanding food safety issues and create strategies that empower stakeholders to make science-based decisions. By using numerical methods and interview-based research approaches, and working with farmers, food workers, consumers, Dr. Feng's work can increase the knowledge of different sectors of the food supply chain. This is often done through extension work involving pre- and post-harvest interventions and creating programs designed to create behavioral change for better food safety practices. Some of the more important work includes the creation of a food safety curriculum that uses a ton of qualitative and quantitative research data, as well as work with the COVID-19 pandemic, such as compiling a large list of resources from experts regarding food safety, personal hygiene tips, to grocery shopping safety, and even information for farmers and manufacturers. Since joining Purdue in 2018, her and her lab has not only focused on food safety involving food handlers, but also dedicated a lot of time to creating and hosting extension events such as this webinar. These events have varied from 4-H outreach to professional development of educators to the creation of culturally tailored educational interventions. However, today, Dr. Betty Feng will be speaking about the topic of dry food and nut safety. You may start whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you. Yeah, so today I would like to share with everyone what we learned in the past couple of years about low moisture foods. So when we talk about low moisture foods, what are they? They could be wheat flour, dried tree nuts, spices, dried fruits. So historically, consumers, of course, including our family and friends, always thought low moisture foods like wheat flour, they are white, they're pure, they should be clean, and there should not be any bacteria on it. But the reality was, over the years, we did start to get foodborne outbreaks and food recalls that are associated with those low moisture foods. They could be contaminated with Salmonella, E. coli. So recently in 2019, we started to conduct research on understanding how our consumers perceive low moisture foods and how they handle low moisture foods. So with that, we noticed that when it comes to low moisture foods, our consumers often feel like they are at lower risk for foodborne illness. So we ask them to rate how much risk they perceive the following food in terms of making them sick for foodborne illness. We noticed that the traditional food safety concerned food items, we call it higher risk perception foods like raw meat, raw milk, raw cheese. They tend to have a higher risk perception among consumers. But when it comes to wheat flour, tree nuts, and spices, dried fruit. They're particularly low. I drew a line 5. Level 5 means on the scale for people is the middle point where they perceive less flour below 5. So you can see all the low moisture foods are on the lowest among all of the food items we probed. And today, my presentation will focus on 3 items: wheat flour, tree nuts, and the dried fruit. Let's start from wheat flour. So we noticed that although the general consumers, many times they don't really know flour could be linked to foodborne illness. But in the past 10 years, just in the US and Canada, there have been multiple foodborne outbreaks, sickened over 200 people just from wheat flour that was contaminated by E. coli or Salmonella. And later research found that actually, when we surveyed the US wheat at harvest, we did find the prevalence of Salmonella and E. coli. Those bacteria are naturally exist in soil and in many other natural environment. A lot of the consumers may not really know how do those pure white wheat flour were processed. If we share with them, actually it's just a milling process. There is no heating or treatment that would kill possible bacteria that has already been on the wheat. Although, as I shared, in the past 10 years, there have been many wheat flour associated foodborne outbreaks. But when we ask our flour consumers, 85% of them told us that they have never ever heard of a flour recall or outbreak. But the reality is, if you type flour recall in Google search, all those information, all of those messages sent out by CDC, shared by other media, pop up. It seems like our wheat consumers just didn't get the information that they should get. They didn't really know that wheat flour is a raw food commodity, just like raw meat, raw poultry. They are raw food commodity, has not have been heat treated or pasteurized. And when we ask the consumers, nearly 1,000 consumers that we surveyed who claim that they use flour to make dough, make cake batter, 66% of them said they have eaten or played with the raw dough or batter. If you think about the 85% of people who have never heard of foodborne outbreak associated with flour, this number could be easier to be understood. But among the food safety researchers and educators, this number could be scary.
Over there. How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
So we also conducted some content analysis of popular recipes. We noticed that popular recipes often lack food safety messages. Consumers often consult web-based content anywhere from Food Network to those bloggers to learn about how I can bake better, how I can make better food. But however, we noticed that a lot of the informations shared on those recipes, on those sources, never talk about food safety associated with flour. We evaluated 85 blog recipes and over 100 YouTube videos from those popular sources. We found that many of those videos actually had quite some cross-contamination events that we could observe in the video. Those could be risky for consumers, especially when they handle the wheat flour that is very easy to get to everywhere and hard to clean. And also, we specifically look at cookie dough. I have to admit that whenever I go to a education event, whenever I ask my audience to raise their hand if you have ever had cookie doughs, no matter this audience were lay consumers or scientists, we often get more than 50% of people would raise their hand, say, yes, I enjoy cookie dough and I have tasted cookie dough before. So specifically, we want to look at how do people currently suggest consumers to make ready-to-eat cookie doughs. That's a very trendy item on social media. So we noticed that from the blogs and videos, like 17 blogs talk about cookie dough, ready-to-eat cookie dough making, and 50 videos talk about cookie dough making. And we noticed that a lot of them, they have recommendations about heat treatment. They either tell people that, oh, you should put your flour in an oven to bake it, or put the flour in the microwave to microwave it, and then it's safe to use to make ready-to-eat cookie dough. However, we noticed that those treatments have not been scientifically validated because consumers really rely on those recipes, really rely on those sources. Such mistakes being made in those videos or blog recipes could be even more influential to the consumers. Over time, when we talk about cookie dough, over time, we notice that the industry also recognizes this could be a potential risk. So some of the industry stakeholders start to make real ready-to-eat cookie dough. So their process is different from what the bloggers suggested. Oh, they just baked the flour. They use their own treatment, which are validated, proven, has scientific evidence to show that those have been pasteurized and those cookie dough can be ready to eat. So we need to remind our consumers, our students, our trainees to double check the labels, whether those cookie doughs really said that it's safe to eat. If they say, do they tell you what are the treatment they use? Another interesting item we noticed while in the past few years researching wheat flour, is food safety messages on those packages. I don't know how many of you have ever noticed those pictures, those little teeny tiny reminders saying that do not eat raw batter, dough, or mix on those batter mix, brownie mix, or wheat flour. So we conducted a research, an experiment. So we designed a message that is very similar to the message you see under message 1, which is just the recommendation, do not eat raw batter, raw dough. And the second message was developed based on the message you see underneath the message 2. So provide them a little bit background why you shouldn't eat raw dough. And then we also developed a third one, not only including the recommendations and the whys, but also tell them the benefit. If you don't do this, you are less likely to get sick from foodborne illness. So we ask consumers to rate how much impact those information could be on your behavior. So we noticed that eaters are those people who admit that they have eaten raw cookie dough and raw cake batter before. We noticed that the messages have significantly less effectiveness among those eaters compared to those non-eaters. And also, interestingly, older adults are more cautious about the messages. They felt like once I read this message, in the future, I will not eat it anymore. So currently, we are conducting more research on the messages, including understanding which location on the package could be more noticeable by consumers. We use eye tracking devices trying to capture how do consumers find those messages on the packages. And also, we are currently developing an extension publication teaching using a Q&A format, trying to inform our lay consumers and also sometimes also our food handlers to learn more about the food safety implications of wheat flour. And if you have already signed up this webinar, we will definitely share with you our extension publication once it's available. The second item I want to share with you would be the tree nuts. So tree nuts were also involved in multiple recalls and outbreaks in the past several years. And this example, like I'm listing here, is just happened this year. So interestingly, tree nuts nowadays is no longer just the dried nuts you snack. People start to be interested in the nutritional benefit from the tree nuts. So more and more lay consumers as well as food entrepreneurs start to make innovative food items using tree nuts, including this example. This manufacturer made pistachio brie, so the delicious French cheese, but they made out of tree nuts. So if you think about making cheese, there will be time you need to soak the nuts, and then the soaking part may have food safety implications if the nuts are not pasteurized, or if the water being used are not fully boiled or pasteurized. So we noticed that. And another item we have been conducting research is some other trendy food handling practices around using tree nuts. So including making milk, almond milk, walnut milk, and soaked almonds. So if you go to some of the trendy or green supermarkets, you may find sometimes when in the nuts area, they may sell some of the packaged nuts. They call it activated almonds. So what does that mean? So in some culture, especially Middle East or Indian cultures, they believe that if you soak almonds, that will provide a lot of health benefits. A lot of the enzyme in the almond will be awakened. So that's why there started to have some newer food products called like activated almonds. So what we did was we want to understand, are there any food safety risk associated with such practice, soaking the nuts? Because no matter whether you're going to make the activated nuts or you're going to make milk or even like cheese or yogurt, nut yogurts, the very first step is always soaking. So how do like bacteria, or whether bacteria can grow while soaking the nuts, would be a question. So a past study that was just published last year, I work with Dr. Linda Harris, trying to understand the process. So we did notice that in the room temperature, bacteria like Salmonella, E. coli, they do grow in the room temperature if you soak the nuts for a long time. So, and the increase can be significant. And also we noticed that a lot of the activated nuts being sold currently on the market are dried. So that means they soak the nuts, and then they use very low temperature to dry the nuts. So it has a longer shelf life, but they still think because we soaked it, so it's already activated. So we also want to know whether those low temperature drying could kill Salmonella or E. coli. The study, we found that, unfortunately, even if we dry it to the same water activity and moisture level compared with the before drying, like before soaking status, if you use a low temperature, like 66 degrees Celsius, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the level of Salmonella does not have a significant decrease. So, which means if you do not use, if you use already contaminated water or contaminated nuts to soak the nuts, even if later on you dry it with low temperature, make it again get to the low moisture food category, it does not kill any bacteria, and the bacteria that grown during the soaking period will still be there. So the take-home message for the tree nuts, those like trendy food recipes associated with soaked nuts, are we need to make sure if you soak or making milk or making cheese, you need to use clean water and clean utensils and source the pasteurized nuts. Soak those nuts in low temperature, for example, in the refrigerator, and do not soak for too long. So, and also, it's very important to remind our consumers that if you use low temperature to dry your almonds or dry other nuts that are heavily soaked, they do not kill the bacteria that you wanted to kill. So talking about drying, another item we have been conducting research on was produce, like fruit drying. So I am a like apple lover. I love my fresh apple as well as dried apples. So unfortunately, in the past couple of years, we have seen some dried fruit have been associated with foodborne outbreaks and recalls. The reason was very, very similar to what we talked about before. Because that was why we started to conduct research, understanding how do home apple dryers drying their apples, and what are the practices they currently practice, how safe or how risky are those practices. So we developed a 27 item behavior scale. So if they answer all 27 items in the way that we practicing the best practices, then they will get 100%, which is the highest possible number, highest possible score. But in reality was, after we surveyed over 900 consumers, we found that on average, the home apple dryers, they score poorly on the food safety index. The average score is only 31 out of 100. So some of the items I want to highlight in this webinar is our home apple dryers. They admit that they do not always wash their hands during preparation or before the preparation. And almost half, they do not wash all their kitchen tools adequately. It means like they may just rinse the kitchen tools instead of using soap and water to adequately remove the bacteria, possibly grow on it. And then more than 2 in 10, so more than 20% of people who use dehydrator, they use the same dehydrator that they use to dry meat. And between drying meat and drying the apples, there was no adequate wash and sanitation between the processes. So all of those practices could be risky. And also we noticed that when it comes to telling when it is dried, 87% of the participants told us they do not check or monitor the drying temperatures. So as I mentioned before, when we talk about almond drying, even at 150 degrees Fahrenheit, like 66 degrees Celsius, it's not adequate to kill Salmonella on the soaked almonds. So currently we don't have a lot of enough data, but based on the previous study, it shows that a low temperature, like what I mentioned, does not really kill bacteria during the drying on apples. And 96% of the consumers do not measure the parameters like the water activity, moisture content, or pH for the doneness. So basically, even if they dried their apple, they wouldn't really know how safe or how risky their practices are. So some of the processes like pre-treatment, especially using some acid to pre-treat your apples, could be a food safety enhancing step. So we asked people, among those who already pre-treat their apples, we asked them why they would do that. Food safety is not the top reason. So only 40% of people thought, oh, what I do actually could improve the food safety. Most of the consumers or home dryers just do this because they want to improve the flavor or preserve the color, more on the quality side, less on the food safety side. So the take-home message for us when we talk with our consumers, our clientele, about apple drying or preserving your fruits or produce, always share with them some background of how the bacteria reduction works in the drying process, right? So you can show them what we found with some other previous studies, show them the figure so they understand, okay, so the bacteria could still exist even if it's during the drying process. If the temperature is not high enough, it does not necessarily kill the bacteria. Temperature, moisture monitoring in the dry process can be essential when it comes to food safety control, food safety management. And then treatment, the pre-processing techniques, some of them can reduce the risk. And washing hands, properly clean and sanitizing the utensils are the key to make sure batch to batch your food being prepared are safe to eat. So with that, I want to pause a little bit. So this is the end of our major content of this webinar. So we developed a 5-question post survey for you to share with us who you are, and also we want to know how you're going to use this information you learned from this webinar. So Zach, can you please post the post survey in the chat box, and I will continue.
I just posted.
Yes.
Please let me know if you guys don't see it.
Thank you. Thank you. And this material would not be possible to present to you without the funding from USDA NIFA. So this is a center for food safety for low moisture foods. And I'm very lucky to be part of that center to conduct research. And without the hard work of my graduate students listed on the picture, the data cannot be available to be presented. And also, I would highly recommend you to follow us on Instagram. So on Instagram, we periodically post food safety messages in some very relatable and fun ways. So please, you can share this with your clientele. This has been a great place for us to interact with our consumers, to promote some trendy food safety risk, and to remind everyone in very picture-oriented way. And also our Twitter, we post our events and recent publications on Twitter. And also we have a lab website where we deposit and archive all of our publications, and including webinars like this on the website. So please let me know if you have any questions.